Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Knox Williams. I'm the president of a group called the American Suppressor Association. We're here today to talk about what this bill would do to suppressors, and I think we need to be clear on the fact that a ban on suppressors in New Mexico would do nothing to deter crime, but rather would deprive New Mexicans from one of the most effective tools available to help protect their hearing. Suppressors don't silence anything. There's nothing that can ever silence the noise of a gunshot except in Hollywood. In reality, they reduce the noise of a gunshot to a less dangerous sound level. That's why the CDC, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, the National Hearing Conservation Association all support suppressors as a tool to mitigate otherwise preventable hearing damage for law-abiding gun owners, hunters, and their dogs. According to the National Hearing Conservation Association, and this is a direct quote, although firearm suppressors do not completely eliminate the risk of noise-induced hearing loss from firearm noise, the risk can be significantly reduced. That's because even suppressed gunshots are loud. The recommendation to wear hearing protection when shooting suppressed firearms for more than 1 or 2 shots is much like the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's recommendation to wear a seatbelt while driving a car with airbags. The NHCA goes on to state, quote, persons wearing conventional hearing protection are not without risk of noise-induced hearing loss when using firearms. To paraphrase, earplugs and earmuffs on their own are not sufficient. They conclude by stating, and I quote, using conventional hearing protection in conjunction with the suppressor can significantly reduce the risk of noise-induced hearing loss more than either device alone. To put it plainly, the more safety layers that you have, the safer that you will be. Aside from hearing damage, I have a question. How can a noise that's loud enough to warrant the use of traditional hearing protection devices somehow pose a threat to public safety? At the beginning of 2019, there were nearly 20,000 suppressors in circulation in the state of New Mexico. Based on nationwide growth over the past 2 years, we estimate that there are now somewhere in the neighborhood of 40,000 suppressors in circulation in this state already. There are also 213 federally licensed businesses in New Mexico, all of which would be impacted directly by this legislation. Suppressors are among the most heavily regulated items in existence and have been since the passage and enactment of the National Firearms Act of 1934. Every single item that's a part of the National Firearms Act is controlled at every step from manufacture to sale by the federal government. In order to make a suppressor, you have to be federally licensed. In order to sell a suppressor, you have to be federally licensed. In order to purchase a suppressor, you have to first receive approval from the ATF before you can take possession. When you buy a suppressor, you apply to the ATF with what's called a Form 4 application. This application includes fingerprint cards, passport-style pictures, and a $200 transfer tax per item. ATF then takes your information and transmits it to the FBI, where they conduct a background check. Only after you pass that background check and ATF physically adheres a stamp to your application and mails that back to your licensed dealer are you then able to take possession. This is a variable process with wait times ranging anywhere from between about 6 to 18 months on average. Even the ATF acknowledges that suppressors are not a threat to public safety. They have gone on record stating, and I quote, silencers are very rarely used in criminal shootings. Given the lack of criminality associated with silencers, it is reasonable to conclude that they should not be viewed as a threat to public safety. That is from ATF, the organization that has regulated suppressors since their inception. Although rarely used in crimes, the criminal use does carry stiff federal penalties already. Using a suppressor in the commission of a crime carries a 30-year federal sentence. Even the simple possession of an unregistered suppressor carries a 10-year sentence and a $250,000 federal penalty. I ask you, what problem exactly would this fix? It seems to me to be a solution in search of a problem that does not exist. If this legislation were enacted, it would disproportionately impact law-abiding gun owners.
Your thumb has slipped off of the thing, I think. Yeah.
Pardon, I'm sorry. Thank you, sir. And I'll be quick. I'm nearly finished. If this legislation were enacted, it would disproportionately impact law-abiding gun owners, including hunters and guides who rely on suppressors to protect their hearing. We know from peer-reviewed studies and research that nearly 70 to 80% of hunters never wear hearing protection. Not sometimes, but never. That's because they want to be able to hear their surroundings. As a direct result, for every 5 years of hunting, hunters become 7% more likely to experience high-frequency hearing loss. Amplified over a lifetime, it's no surprise that most hunters wind up in hearing aids. I spent 3 years working for Automotive Research, the company that makes some of the best electronic hearing protection devices in the world. I use them every time I shoot, but no electronic hearing protection will ever be able to replicate open ear conditions because they cannot localize sounds as well as an unoccluded or unobstructed ear. Banning suppressors and telling hunters to use earplugs or earmuffs while in the field is akin to preaching abstinence is the only way to prevent unwanted pregnancies. Sure, earplugs and earmuffs do help prevent hearing damage, and they should be used. But based on the science and the scientific experts at the National Hearing Conservation Association, we know that traditional hearing protection on its own is insufficient, and we know that they are rarely used in the field. Thank you, and I'd be welcome to answer any questions.
Thank you. Sir?
I very carefully listened to the comments about the silencers and suppressors, and and I would not be opposed, based on the very strict requirements of that, to potentially remove those. However, I have a little bit of concern about the transfer and others if that does not require going back through that long, lengthy process for oversight. Clearly, ATF believes that those have some danger, or they would not require such extensive background in order to have those included. But I understand what he was saying about the hearing, etc.
Should we ask him? Let's ask the man from the Suppressor Association, which is kind of an interesting name for any group.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, sir. To answer that question, it's a little bit multifaceted. Any transfer of a suppressor does have to go through the ATF process. There is no individual-to-individual sale. Every step of the way, it has to go through ATF approval.
And while you're up there, is a muffler, a silencer, or devices for deadening or muffling the sound, all of those they would all fall into that same umbrella term?
Yes, sir. It's anything that diminishes the noise of a portable firearm under federal law, basically. So we call them suppressors. They're also known as silencers, mufflers. In the UK, they call them moderators. Colloquially, in the industry, we call them cans. But it's anything that just makes a gun quieter.
So you would move then, you'd be comfortable deleting that section of the bill?
Mr. Chair, I'd be comfortable removing that, provided there are not loopholes like we have heard with the gun show loopholes or other ways of transferring where they are not registered and known to ATF and law enforcement. And so if in fact I can be assured that that is the case, I don't have any problem with removing those from the list.
Yes, sir. We can make that assurance, and I'd be more than happy to chat offline with you if you'd like.
So who would like to move the amendment? Senator Cedillo Lopez? Is that a friendly amendment?
That would be a friendly amendment, again, provided that there aren't ways that people can buy their own kits without going through the process. That's where the concern would be.
On the matter of kits?
Yes, sir. So solvent traps or kits, ATF has moved recently to basically end that. You can make a suppressor as a non-licensed business. You do have to file what's called a Form 1, which is effectively the same thing. It's just a non-licensed entity or individual is making that, and you have to go through the same process. So in order to do it legally, regardless of whether an individual is making it or a business is making it, you do have to go through and receive approval from ATF prior to doing that, again, in the lawful sense.
Is there any opposition to adopting that amendment?
I vote no.
Okay, well, let's take a recorded vote then. Secretary will call the roll on the amendment to delete on page 3, line 6, the whole section about mufflers, silencers, or devices for deadening or muffling the sound of discharge firearms.
Senator Gallegos.
Pass.
Senator Hickey.
Yes.
Senator Engel, Senator Maestas, Senator McKenna. No. Senator Schmidis.
Pass.
Senator Cedillo Lopez.
Yes.
Senator Tallman.
Yes.
Senator Gallegos.
Yes.
Senator Schmidis.
Yes.
Senator Tizipino.
Yes.
6 yes, 1 no.
By a vote of 6 in the affirmative, 1 in the negative, with a couple of
Two excused.
2 excused, the amendment is adopted. And we're back on the bill. Senators, comments, suggestions, further amendments. Senator Cedillo Lopez.
As a nonprofit, our job is to fight for your rights, and we could not do it without your support. Your membership and your donations fund our fights in Washington, D.C. and in state capitals across the country. I promise that the American Suppressor Association will not stop fighting until suppressors are removed from the National Firearms Act and are legal to own in all 50 states. Help us protect your right to protect your hearing by making sure your membership in the American Suppressor Association is active. Visit us at asamember.com to join or renew today. That's asamember.com.